Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Helena, aka NoJusticeMTG. You know who it is. And I'm joined tonight by Kieran and Andrieu. Kieran, we have to stop meeting like this.
No, I disagree. We mustn't stop meeting like this. And as always, Helena, there is nowhere I would rather be on a Thursday evening at 6 p.m. than joining you to co-host Novara Live. So great to be here.
All joking aside, the feeling is, as always, incredibly mutual. Kieran, it is a pleasure to share the show with you tonight. Speaking of which, coming up tonight, Labour has overseen an increase in the use of asylum hotels, more evidence that the Israel lobby is very, very real indeed, and we look at the left-wing candidates revitalising the Democratic Party in the United States. If you like Zohran Mamdani, you're sure to love these guys too. Stay tuned for all of that and more. It's been a difficult week for the Labour government when it comes to migration. On Tuesday, a judge ordered a hotel in Epping housing asylum seekers to close after a council obtained an injunction. By Wednesday, Conservative councils across England said they were planning to do the same, egged on by the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch. And today, Labour councils have said they're considering doing the exact same. In total, 80 Labour, Conservative and Reform councils have said they're considering legal challenges against hotels in their districts used to house asylum seekers. If that comes to fruition, it'll leave Keir Starmer's government with a huge problem on its hands. With an estimated 30,000 asylum seekers currently housed in just over 200 hotels, the forced closure of even a third of them would leave the government having to find homes for 10,000 people. Compounding Labour's misery this morning was the release of the government's latest asylum statistics. And the figure shows that the number of asylum seekers housed in hotels is up 8% in a year, which they said they were going to try and stop the use of by 2029, so it's going well. The stats aren't all bad, though. The government is now processing asylum claims much more quickly. There are now only 71,000 cases awaiting review. A year ago, that figure stood at 134,000. But while Keir Starmer's government may be improving the processing of claims, it's completely failed to tackle the Tories' policy of supercharging the issue of migration. How? By grouping asylum seekers in hotels in the middle of often small communities, thereby making them both highly visible and troubling to the electorate. Not only has Labour failed to reverse that policy, it's pretty unclear how much progress it's made in reducing hotel use. This was Home Office Minister Dan Jarvis on BBC Breakfast yesterday.
We've never thought that hotels were a long-term sustainable solution for accommodating asylum seekers. That's why the government made a very clear commitment that we're going to reduce to zero the number of hotels that are being used to accommodate asylum seekers. Under the previous government, there were something like 400 hotels in use. We've driven that number down to 200.
Appearing on the same show today was Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp.
When the Conservatives were in power, I think the peak number of asylum seekers in hotels was over 50,000. So I'm just curious as to why then Conservative councils weren't seeking to take legal action against the government, but you are now.
Well, the reason is that after that peak was hit, the Conservative government centrally, nationally took action, which halved that number. It went from 56,000 down to, I think it was 29,000 at the time of the election, went from 400 down to about 200 hotels. So the Conservative government nationally took action and halved the hotel number
but in a way, Mr.
during
Philp,
its last 9 months in office.
Stand.
So you've got Dan Jarvis saying Labour drove the number of asylum hotels down from 400 down to 200. And you've got Chris Philp saying, no, it was the Tory swan song. Well, who's right? For once, unfortunately, it's Chris Philp. Earlier this year, in an answer to a parliamentary question, Labour's Minister for Border Security and Asylum confirmed that in July 2024, the month Starmer's government took office, there were just 213 asylum hotels in use. There are now thought to be 210 asylum hotels, meaning Labour has managed to close just 6 after more than a year in office. Asylum hotels don't serve anybody. They're a terrible way to house asylum seekers, who are often separated from those that they may know in the UK, forced into shared accommodation with inadequate facilities, and subject to abuse from some members of the communities that they're in. They're also bad for those communities too, often depriving them of important social and economic amenities, while providing flashpoints for protests and violence from the far right. And it's worth pointing out on this one too, is that on the continent, they do have specifically built asylum processing centres because they had an asylum problem before we did. They had an asylum problem. They've had it for over a decade. So they had purpose-built facilities. We didn't have these things built because we only expected to not have to deal with it until we had a Brexit deal that got rid of our access to the Dublin Protocol, which meant that there was no essential push factor from stopping people from coming here because they would be sent back to a country of origin or a place they have a link on the continent. Now we're not part of that agreement. That's when we started seeing the border crossings being much more likely, that people started coming on the boats more likely. And because we'd failed to prepare, we're having to use contingency accommodation, that's what it's called, to house people. And that's at the expense of communities, at the expense of government funds. It costs 7 times more to house an asylum seeker in a hotel than in regular dispersal accommodation or indeed in purpose-built facilities. So it's bad for public purse, it's bad for the communities, and indeed it is bad for the asylum seekers themselves. Kieran, the government's got itself into a right mess with this one, haven't they?
The hotel system has to be dismantled. It's as simple as that. It's, as you say, Helena, it's a disaster for the people who have to live in those hotels and spend time in those hotels while they're being processed. They're often unsanitary. Conditions are far from ideal for human habitation. And it's almost as though they've been perfectly designed or calculated as a system to draw the ire of communities, as you said, because they kind of force a sort of very visible ghettoization which prevents any kind of integration and very clearly demarcates the boundaries between a community and the individuals who are staying in this, as I say, often unsanitary set of environments or conditions. Now, councils with the power to carry out injunctions, as they obviously, have, it seems that they have the effective powers to do that now, and that's going to set in motion a sort of NIMBY pass the parcel, if you like. I think that it's very likely that every council will get in on this, or as many councils, many councils will get in on this, resulting in these hotels being completely unviable and certainly not up to matching the number of people, the level of need, basically, the level of demand. I think really what's necessary is that asylum seekers need to be mainstreamed while they're being processed. They need to be mainstreamed into British society. And I know that sounds like a terribly unorthodox thing to a lot of people who think that this is the number one issue in Britain today. But actually, by mainstreaming asylum seekers into British society, like you said, it means that we save on the public purse. We don't have to spend insane amounts of money, untenable amounts of money on hotels, which line the pockets very often of private owners, private firms, and so on. And it will enable asylum seekers, if we mainstream them properly. One thing we should do, in my view, is allow them to work. I mean, I think the average time, average amount of processing time today or currently is 413 days in this country. Now, that's down from what it was in 2023, around 700 days in 2023, I believe. But that's still an insanely long amount of time for people to be forced to sit on their hands. Often asylum seekers, and I don't think they have to have these skills, by the way, in order to come here, flee war zones and so on. But many of them are very skilled people, individuals, who would have a lot to contribute to our economy. They're being forced by a system to be idle, to be listless. And I think that's, as much as anything else, it's just on every single front, you could not have designed a worse system or a worse expression of the system. And so I think, asylum seekers need to be mainstreamed a lot more. Let's keep a sense of perspective as well. Helena, you mentioned continental Europe, which is by no means perfect in the way that it does this. But just, maintain a semblance of perspective. Germany has welcomed and is home to 2.6 million refugees and asylum seekers, 2.6 million plus. Britain, I think, currently is around 485,000. Now, I don't say that doesn't pose challenges for, that does. Obviously, public services need to be adapted to accommodate people in new areas of the country and communities and so on. But the way that it's being done presently is a dream to the Farages of the world. I don't say those guys wouldn't complain about any and everything, they would. But the way it's being done at the moment, as I say, very visibly ghettoises in those individuals from the communities in which they're now dwelling. We need to mainstream asylum seekers via work, via housing, and so on into British society while they're waiting to be processed.
I totally agree that they need to be allowed to work. I was looking at the stats from Migration Observatory the other day, and 16% of asylum seekers have like degree level qualifications or similar. That's not as high, obviously, as the existing population already, but it's still very high, right? There's still a lot of people who have, as you say, applicable skills. Not the people who don't have those degrees, don't have skills. A lot of them will do so as well, right? But just when you look at qualifications in the microcosm, these are people who could be contributing to society whilst their claim is being heard. And we're just, again, making them wards of the state where they are being seen by the public as this big burden to the public purse. That's no good for anybody. It's bad for the public, and it's bad for the asylum seekers, and it's bad for the Treasury. It's a really silly decision as far as I'm concerned to stop them working. My preferred method would be to copy the kind of continental model, have an asylum processing centre, purpose-built. You can have English language courses in there. You can get the ability to get them ready to be integrated once they're out of asylum processing. You've gone through all of the different like biometrics and checks that you need to go through to ensure that you're not dealing with somebody who's got a criminal record elsewhere, or so that you can have at least a proper vetting procedure. The issue that I have is that I don't trust any of the three major parties in this country, Labour, Tories or Reform, to build, run or operate any of these kind of asylum processing centres in the way that you would need to do so to be able to give these people an adequate standard of living so that it's not punitive or punishing, because people want to have a deterrent type effect, right? For what it's worth, I just want to just kind of head something else off at the pass here as well, if you don't mind, that a lot of people think asylum seekers being housed in hotels means they're being housed in the kind of conditions that you'd get if you were buying a room in a hotel yourself. And like, just think of the mechanics for 5 seconds and you realize this doesn't make sense. Like, the hoteliers who are getting the government contracts get a fixed price from the state. As a business owner, you know that you have to maximize revenue and minimize overheads. They have fixed revenue from the state, can't do anything with that. So all they do is minimize overheads, right? As you pointed out, the conditions aren't great. They're getting asylum seekers 3 or 4 in a room, very little else to do. The food isn't not like room service. It's not 4-star room service because they're not paying customers. They're people who are being housed on a government contract, right? So it is usually as cheap as it can possibly be to maximize profit for this hoteliers. So there is a real misconception that they're living in actual hotel accommodation like you would do if you were a paying customer, which just is completely untrue. Again, it would be cheaper and better off if we had asylum processing centres, but at the moment it seems that all of the options that we have, the hotel method is the worst in terms of public policy, for the cost, for the impact on society, and for the optics of the state as well, because clearly nobody wants it, at least not the government, who hates having it continually be in the public zeitgeist over and over and over again. Now let's look at a related phenomenon that's sweeping parts of the country right now.
Follow him, boys. Follow him.
Right, you can't come in, might want to let these ones go.
Keep going. Wait, now come back. Stop watching.
Last two, thank you.
Cover him, don't let the old Will see him.
Picking up butts. There you go, legend. Let's go.
Way!
Now, if you're listening on the podcast, that was a video of a group of English flag-loving vigilantes spray painting the white parts of a zebra crossing with incredibly thin stripes of red paint to make it look extremely vaguely like a St. George's cross. That's a part of what self-described English patriots are calling Operation Raising the Colours. And zebra crossings aren't the only road-based surfaces having paint daubed on them. Roundabouts in Birmingham, Worcestershire and Greater Manchester have also been spray painted to resemble England flags. But the main point of Operation Raising the Colours has been to get people to put up actual flags. Thousands of Union flags and St. George's flags have sprung up across the country, affixed to lampposts, bridges, and even cranes. Now, the reaction from councils has been mixed. Some have taken them down, citing concerns over driver visibility and other safety issues, and some appear to have left them up. But the people behind Operation Raising the Colours have often seemed to have cast themselves as some kind of patriotic rebels. Among them is Tories' privately educated Cambridge graduate Shadow Justice Minister Robert Jenrick, hardly an anti-establishment figure. But the gag is, flying more flags is the current British government policy. On the government website, there's even guidance called Flying Flags, a plain English guide. In that guidance, it says this: flags are a very British way of expressing joy and pride. They're emotive symbols which can boost local and national identities, strengthen community cohesion, and mark civic pride. The government wants to see more flags flown, particularly the Union flag, the flag of the United Kingdom. There you go. Keir Starmer is very happy for you to fly those flags, and you can absolutely keep making him happy, you wonderful conformists. Although what I will point out, in that very specific guide, it does say that you need permission from the Highway Authority to affix them to lampposts. And as far as I'm aware, if you don't get permission, it's a £5,000 fine. So if you're a shadow justice minister who's putting those flags up, probably make sure that you do have permission, otherwise it might make you look quite silly. Kieran, what's your opinion on flying the flag? Do you think it's a display of British patriotism, or is it just a little bit cringe?
First of all, it's always very funny to see the bureaucratic state trying to paraphrase what it thinks its great general public will want of it. I don't really care about flags per se. I mean, unless they're the flags of, deeply offensive, a swastika or something like that. That obviously, then it becomes relevant, and then I have strong views about it. I think flags tend to be. I think that this is a dare. I think it's basically an elephant trap. I don't think the purpose is to put up as many St George's flags as possible, actually. I think the purpose is to see who dares to take them down. And I think, I haven't looked into it in detail, but I think there's already been some sort of far-right talking points around Tower Hamlets with allegedly, they allege, so it's very important to caveat it as heavily as that, they allege that the council was removing or so on. I don't know whether that's true or not, but clearly, in a way, whether it is or not is irrelevant. I think it speaks to the raison d'etre of their doing this, which is that actually, yes, of course, ostensibly they want to see their streets awash with more St George flags or Union Jacks or whatever the hell. But actually, I think it's a trap. I think that they're putting them up and they're daring people, councils, authorities, prominent individuals, whatever, to take them down so that they can then get them on the headlines on GB News, in the Sun, in the Mail, and wherever else. And of course, on Generics and Chris Philps and whoever else's desk, so that it can be fertile territory for the next kind of theatre of war in the culture wars. That's what I think these guys want to do, and that's what I think they're doing. They're basically laying as many traps as possible for liberals, for the left, whatever you want to, whatever bogeymen they have, whatever straw men they have, whatever straw men they've amalgamated in their heads. I think that's the purpose of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it definitely runs counter to this narrative that they think that there's this big cohort of people that they get triggered, that the libs are going to get triggered if they put up a bunch of flags. I'm like, no one really cares. No one really cares. But of course, as you say, the councils are probably going to take some of them down because, again, it's technically, if they don't have permission, it's technically illegal to do so, up to £5,000 fine, right? So they would, for the interest of public safety, want to take them down. But that's a very easy narrative about like two-tier flags, right? If they've not taken down like a pride flag or the Palestinian flag at some point, at some other time for a similar reason, for example. So I do see your point there. It does seem to be a real bait. And I think, I don't rise to it. It's fine. I don't mind having flags there. It's not what I choose, but not exactly going to care very much. If you want to enjoy flying your flags under government guidance, you be my guest. You enjoy yourselves, guys. Much appreciated. The idea of an Israel lobby used to belong to the fringes of conspiratorial thought, or at least that's what liberals wanted you to believe. But since Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza began 23 months ago, it's become almost impossible to deny that protecting Israel, no matter what is, for some reason, part of the national interest of many countries in the West, and not least of all the UK and the United States. In fact, sometimes Israel's interests appear to outweigh the self-interest of our own governments. Here's one example from this week's Private Eye. Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest arms firm, is a key cog in the Israeli war machine, is close to winning a £2 billion contract that would make it a strategic partner of the Ministry of Defence, working on the training of 60,000 British soldiers every year. Elbit Systems UK, its British arm, is bidding for the Army Collective Training Service contract. The chosen bidder will work with the MOD to transform military training through digitisation, simulation, and a different relationship with industry, and by changing how and where the military trains. And the article goes on to say this. Many defence giants put in bids, but in February the MOD reduced the bidders down to two, Elbit and Raytheon. The MOD paid the companies £2 million each to develop their bids. The development period was supposed to run until mid-August, meaning the final decision is imminent. The article concludes with this. Elbit has certainly done its best to get inside the track with the ministry, appointing two top former MOD figures to its UK board of directors, Sir Simon Bolam, who made the move in June, CI 1651, and Sir Mark Puffley. The firm has already had similar contracts with the MOD. Since 2023, it has run Project Vulcan, a £57 million 10-year contract of simulation-based training for tank crews. But the new deal would be a significant step up, both in value and in its relationship with the MOD. The Eye asked the MOD if it would be appropriate to give such a company so involved in the Gaza war such a major contract, but it did not respond. Okay, so let's just get this straight. Early in July, so just 7 weeks ago, MPs voted overwhelmingly to prescribe domestic direct action group Palestine Action. But during court proceedings, it emerged that Home Secretary Yvette Cooper had been advised to prescribe Palestine Action in March this year, not because the intelligence services thought it was a risk to human beings, but because of the damage to property that it inflicted on, amongst other sites, Elbit factories and offices. But according to Private Eye, it was only a month earlier, that is February, that Elbit was selected as one of the finalists for a £2 billion tender from the Ministry of Defence. In March, Declassified reported that 3 officials from Yvette Cooper's Home Office secretly met with Elbit officials in December 2024, with both sides agreeing that a recording of the meeting should never be released. And in June, Declassified UK reported on how Elbit lobbied the Home Office in January, pushing for a retrial of Palestine Action's co-founders after charges against them were dismissed. That retrial was granted. Kieran, certainly does seem like the Israeli lobby is very, very real, doesn't it?
First of all, make no mistake, the Israel lobby is Israel's last refuge, right? And that's why it's so bloody important to Israel. When the lobby dies, Israel dies. For a very, very long time, the lobby did not have to exist to the extent that it does. For a long time, Israel was able to rely on propaganda, on what they called Hasbara, which was a way of explaining Israel's narrative to the world. And it was bloody successful. The sort of hearts and minds strategy, which was designed first to kind of, I don't know, erase Palestinians from the face of the earth, pretend Palestinians don't exist, that they're not actual people, or it's not a category of people. And the second thing, to project the idea that Israel was this kind of innocent, idealistic, romantic place forged from the ashes of the Holocaust. And Hasbara was incredibly successful. And it was successful not just because it sort of accidentally tapped into all sorts of sensibilities, but because it was bloody well funded. I think that there's a strong case to be made that if you look at spending on Israel's international PR machinery or apparatus, is actually of a similar order of expenditure to what it was spending on its secret nuclear weapons program. Anyway, that all fell apart. That all fell apart from the 1980s onwards for various reasons. I mean, I've said it before, you know, Palestinians could have had a Nelson Mandela, or we could have had a Martin Luther King, or we could have had nothing we could have done could have conscripted for you know, a pro-Palestine sentiment more than the Israelis themselves, than Israel itself, and the way that it's basically colonized, in the process of colonizing, conducting itself in relation to Palestinians and its treatment of Palestinians. So that, in conjunction with the technological revolution and the ability of Palestinians to cut through Hasbara's bullshit in real time via camera phones and, you know, social media and so on, has basically destroyed the romantic myth that Israel was once able to rely on. And why is this relevant to the lobby? Because the resources that were once kind of concentrated in those areas, the hearts and minds and the kind of manufacturing consent areas, I think it's there's a lot of evidence very clearly was shifted into the Israel lobby around the early 2000s as the kind of romantic myth started to unravel faster and faster, right? And so what we have now is this beefed up lobby on steroids. The Israel lobby's always existed. It existed before the creation of the State of Israel. Originally, it was conceived by people like David Ben-Gurion, but later Ziv Jabotinsky and Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, to convince European Jewry that its real home lay not in Europe, but in Ottoman-controlled Palestine, right? That was the original purpose of the lobby, and that shaded into Hasbara. Its methods were coercive and, manufacturing consent based. But the extent to which the lobby exists now, and the extent to which it has its teeth into institutions in the West, is unprecedented. And I think I'll end on this, Helena. I think it explains why we sort of see this gulf between what the public wants, on the one hand, about the genocide and about the treatment of Palestinians and about Palestinian statehood and about, alliances with Israel. On the one hand, there's sort of the Western public opinion on that. And on the other hand, there are institutions which seem to poorly reflect what polling data tells us about public opinion on those matters. And that is the lobby. That's explained by groups like APEC, UK Lawyers for Israel, and many, many others we could name, sinking their teeth into institutions and having a tremendous amount of influence. And for that reason, our powerful governing institutions, seem to be kind of crippled or in a state of stasis where they will not shift to reflect public opinion on Israel's genocide and slaughter in Gaza. And I think, that's part of the plan, is to make us all feel like we're going completely insane, because it doesn't matter how bad things get. It doesn't matter about how bad the images we see are. And it doesn't matter what our direct actions are, or the number of people on the street, etc. The institutions do not shift. They do not shift. We might have more rhetoric. We might have more window dressing from Keir Starmer and like David Lammy, but nothing changes. Licenses for weapons don't get suspended. Diplomatic cover doesn't recede. Ambassadors don't get expelled, etc., etc. That's the interference of and the influence of the lobby.
Exactly. Like when you're looking at the kind of whole Labour history for the last kind of 5 years, right? The one heuristic that you could continually see them espouse in terms of policy was what polls the best, right? We don't actually care about having a particular ideology. We're just going to go where the public is. We'll triangulate around public opinion. Apart from one thing, which is Israel and Palestine, right? They refuse to triangulate around this and follow public opinion, which has been solidly pro-Palestine for ages, right? Since like November 2023, it sharply changed as soon as the genocide began in Gaza. And yet for some reason, it's this one issue where Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney haven't followed public opinion. And it explains it very easily if you understand that there is one higher power other than public opinion that they speak to, which is the interests, the material interests of the people who lobby them, such as the Israeli state. Now, it isn't only Novara media and other outlets like Declassified that are keen on exposing the Israel lobby. Over the Atlantic, left-wing journalists have long been doing the same in the United States. But now the right is joining the party. Former Fox News anchor Megyn Kelly nowadays has her own YouTube show. And on a recent episode, she was joined by Republican Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene, no relation. That's when Israel's influence on US politics came up.
So one you didn't mention, but I think is also in there, is AIPAC.
Yes.
We should talk about that, because it's the Israeli, pro-Israeli American group.
Yes.
And they are also very good about recruiting politicians early on in their careers. Mm-hmm. And they, like those other groups you mentioned, are deep-pocketed and would love to buy your vote. Mm-hmm. And now they're becoming more controversial because people like you are sort of saying, you don't own me. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of politicians to my left and my right, and literally to your left and right, because Democrats and Republicans who have been purchased, who now may not have the freedom to speak as openly about their thoughts on this. And I think this audience knows, and I know where you stand too on Israel and all that, but I've been very pro-Israel, and I've been very defensive of their right to defend themselves in this nightmare.
Of course.
And I've been very defensive of American Jews on campuses who are just being harassed. It's ridiculous.
Of course.
But I have absolutely no skin whatsoever in defending any lobbyist group, including AIPAC.
Right.
So I would love to know what they do to get the loyalty of politicians, because I will say I have had multiple reach outs to me, both from friends and from connected people in DC, begging me to go to Israel with them. And I have said no every time.
Now, that is when MTG described her own experiences.
I find it fascinating that you're getting asked more and more and more. I've been asked more and more and more. Well, you're a person of very big influence. You've got a big voice. You've got a large audience. They also take a lot of influencers. They invite tons of influencers.
Many of whom have invited me. Like, we're all going together, and will you come? Like, they seem to be coming at me from a number of ways, which only really kind of raises my hackles. Like, I'm not going. I'm going to stay right here. I can cover this conflict from here, and I don't wish to be wooed by any side. I actually don't wish to be persuaded.
Have you been invited by any other foreign country?
No.
Okay, that's the part, right? So we have tons of lobbyists foreign countries lobbyists that come to Washington, D.C. Pretty much every country has some sort of representative. They have an ambassador they send to Washington. It's naturally in their interest. We can understand that. They also are required to register under FARA. It's a law. They have to register as a foreign agent, a foreign lobbyist. That is required. It's extremely important. Here's the difference with AIPAC. AIPAC is not registered under FARA, under this law that requires anyone coming to lobby a member of Congress or a senator or department of the government and the federal government on behalf of another country. So AIPAC argues, but we're Americans. Yes, they are Americans, but they are coming to Congress and to the federal government asking on behalf of the country of Israel.
Taylor Greene also went into AIPAC's relationship to people in the media.
AIPAC takes influencers. They take really big people like you. They want you to come over there. They want to pull you in because they want to pull you on their side. And why is that? Okay, for members of Congress, every single year, annually, Israel receives, and we have to vote on it. It's a yes or no vote, $3.8 billion in funding for Israel. Now, what does that money mean? Well, they'll say, this is for Israel. It's them to be able to defend themselves. They're the only democracy in the Middle East.
Yep.
They're constantly under attack. They're surrounded by their enemies who wants to annihilate them.
That's all true.
Sure, we're not arguing those points. However, let's flip over and look at, what does this mean? Number one, Israel is doing so well with their economy, and I'm excited for them. This is a big deal. I wish we were doing this good. We're $37 trillion in debt. Israel is less than $400 billion in debt. Less than. If you're an Israeli citizen, you have government-funded healthcare and you have government-funded college. So why is America having to give Israel $3.8 billion? If they're doing so great and they're funding healthcare and college, and their government is their economy is doing so well and their tax revenue is so good that they're less than $400 billion in debt, why is dead broke America having to send $3.8 billion? Well, then they argue back and they go, but this helps America's economy. Well, how is that? Tell me how it helps. Okay, well, because we buy money from your defense contractors. Although guess what? This is really interesting. We give a ton of money to all these foreign countries. And if it's military aid, they're required to purchase weapons from our defense contractors. Except Israel is the only one with an exception. They don't have to buy from our American defense contractors. They can use that money to buy from Israeli defense contractors.
Now, let's make it very clear here. Like, Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't some person who's got like a secret inside track who knows what's up. She's somebody who talked previously about quote unquote Jewish space lasers. I think she's pretty anti-Semitic personally. But in terms of what she's talking about there and all of the clips that we've seen, right, is that even somebody who I don't think is particularly perceptive can look at something incredibly simple like America gives lots of its taxpayers' money to a country that clearly doesn't need it, so they get government subsidies whilst Americans don't, and that the interests of that foreign power don't have to register in the same way that other people do in terms of other countries under FARA. Like, it just if someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene can see this, right, how much do the rest of the political establishment in America think that the population of America is just completely stupid, that they can't see this too? And the people amongst the American right are starting to wise up on this, because Marjorie Taylor Greene, along with people like Tucker Carlson, etc., they're the true believers in the America First movement, right? They're the true believers. And some basic heuristic, like we should be spending American money on Americans rather than on the military capacity for a state half across the other side of the world, right? Despite the fact that, of course, there are American imperial interests in the region, clearly she's not smart enough or perceptive enough to understand the geopolitics that's at play here. But on a basic level, she can at the very least see that there is this exception. There is this exception specifically when Israel is concerned. And if she can see it, and the population can see it, then everybody else in DC must think that the population are absolutely idiotic, that they think that they can pull the wool over people's eyes on this kind of stuff. Now, what Taylor Greene describes there is perhaps the most special relationship that exists on the planet, facilitated not only by politicians, but by the US media, to the detriment, it would seem, of even the US's own national interests. And last night, some of our own media played their part in trying to repair an increasingly broken relationship between the British public and Israel's leadership. The Trigonometry podcast aired their interview with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in which they asked him the softest of questions with almost zero pushback against his answers. Now, we had planned to cover that interview today, but honestly, it was so boring, so predictable, it's really not worth your time. It was pretty much a perfect copy of every interview we've seen with Netanyahu on Western mainstream media since Israel began its assault on Gaza, except with slightly more annoying hosts, shall we say, in my personal opinion. Kieran, what did you make of those clips that we just saw there? And what do you think is going to be the political consequences if people like MTG are cottoning on to the reality of the lobby?
Well, just briefly, first of all, I mean, Netanyahu doesn't do an interview unless he thinks it's going to be a soft soap. For all of his, I mean, for a butcher, he is remarkably pusillanimous, remarkably cowardly and spineless as an individual. And the chaps that run Trigonometry, they like to think that they're crusaders of free speech and, you know, robust debate and all of that. And actually, what they are is propagandists with a very clear worldview, and they go soft on those people that advocate for that worldview or embody it, and they go hard on people that they fundamentally disagree with. It's, I think, a charade, and one that befits somebody like Netanyahu very well. So on the split on the right in American politics these days, that seems to be moving from hairline fracture into full chasm, I think it was inevitable. It was inevitable because, you know, I don't want to sort of simplify things too much or be kind of crude about it. But to an extent, Israel has always been a colony of transatlantic kind of interests, right? And that's not to say that Israel, you know, the problem with that thesis, I think, is that my problem with it anyway, is that it exculpates, it forgives Israel and Israelis too much. It kind of removes all their agency and says, you know, these guys are just a satellite state of the US and Britain, and those guys are the real ones. But of course, you know, Britain, France, the United States have an enormous amount of blood, Palestinian blood on their hands. They're enormously responsible for what's happened over the past 100 years. But I also think it's important to pay attention to the kind of, you know, internal dynamics of Israeli society and of Zionism as an ideology, as something which emerges as a particular thing at a particular time. Right. Now, I'm going all over the place, but the reason I'm doing that is to show that it's complicated. Nonetheless, Israel, to an extent, has always been a geostrategic colony of Western imperial interests, and the United States first and foremost. And I think the thing is with that, right, is that it means that Israel is always going to be, to a completely unique, and I would argue unprecedented degree, reliant, among nation states at least, reliant on external benefactors, the US being first and foremost. If you need 3.8 billion quid a year in aid and giveaways from another country in order to survive, then you're in a very serious state indeed. And it was also interesting hearing Marjorie Taylor Stone saying they're only 400 billion in debt. We're 37 trillion or whatever it is. So I think ultimately this was always going to happen. This split between the so-called libertarian right, if you like, Tucker Carlson's of the world, and the kind of neocons embodied by the Douglas Murrays of the world. It was always going to happen because Israel has kind of bound into its structures of survival a down payment of X number of billions every year from America. And that's always going to give kindling to politicians in America, especially if, or not politicians, commentators and some politicians, especially if the new movement du jour of the right is Make America Great Again, and its strapline is America First. I think eventually some people will start saying, follow the money, why is it going out there and why isn't it staying at home? So, I'm here for it. I mean, I think you're right. I think anti-Semitism, unfortunately, for some of these people, certainly Candace Owens, is very clearly one of the motivating factors. Nonetheless, desperate times make for strange bedfellows. I'm not saying that we, ever march or be in the company of anti-Semites, but I'm saying that the sooner this whole wretched relationship between the American right and Israel falls to pieces, the better.
Before we move on to our final story, a reminder that our merch store sells books. Find all your favourite authors at shop.novaramedia.com, including our own Aaron Bastani and Ash Sarkar. And if you enjoyed our recent Downstream in Real Life with historian William Dalrymple, you can also get his book, The Golden Road, for just $12.99 right now. If you want to find out, in the most fascinating and beautifully readable way, how ancient India changed the world, visit shop.novaramedia.com. Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani is taking the US political world by storm, both on and offline, and if polling is to be believed, he's practically a shoo-in for the NYC mayoral election later this year. At a time of political turmoil, rising authoritarianism, an affordability crisis, and a genocide in Gaza, his strategy of a laser focus on clear policy to ease the cost of living and his uncompromising opposition to both President Trump's authoritarianism and the bipartisan support of Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign cut straight through with voters. This, combined with his natural charisma and a savvy use of social media, galvanized an army of canvassers to win over both the disillusioned and the outraged within the Democratic Party base, whose current opinion of the party elite has really hit rock bottom. The Democratic Party as a whole, whilst leading in the congressional ballot due to polls with voters' opposition to Trump, has seen their own approval rating hit rock bottom at -28, with their positivity rating its lowest in NBC's polling since 1990. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has seen his approval tank also. His capitulation to Trump over the congressional budget and widening opposition to his unwavering support for Israel has seen his favorability drop to -28 as well. That's according to YouGov. It's clear that what Americans want to see from their politicians is sincerity, the will to fight, and to make it clear that they're on the sides of voters, something that Mamdani has been very easy and able to master. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries doesn't seem to think so, however. He's refused to endorse the incredibly popular Mamdani, given his steadfast support of Israel and his opposition to the progressive politics of the Democratic Socialists of America, of which Mamdani is a member. The backlash to this non-endorsement has been severe. Here is Emma Fikeland on the Majority Report on MSNBC on how the DSA should react.
What is the issue then with Mamdani that you think breaks through that people like Hakeem Jeffries and the hosts of CNBC and the Bill Ackmans of this world don't get? I know the short answer is the capitalism part of it, but what is it about the mobilization of these people that they want and say that they would like and they say they need in order to win in 2026 and 2028, and yet somehow they're clueless to the fact that he has managed to do it?
I mean, what happened to vote blue no matter who?
Right.
I mean, what happened? I was told that. And then as somebody who is a registered Democrat but was supportive of Bernie Sanders both times he ran, I can't tell you the amount of times that was shouted at us. And many of us did. An overwhelming majority of Bernie supporters did end up supporting the nominee. So this is a very unfortunate thing that Hakeem Jeffries is doing for his own political career, frankly, because in that primary, which was was the largest turnout in the history of New York City mayoral primaries. Zohran Mamdani won in Hakeem Jeffries' own district by double digits, by around 12 points. So this is just basically a siren call for anybody in DSA or anybody who is closely associated with Zohran Mamdani to primary Hakeem Jeffries in his own district. I think that's going to be happening also in Dan Goldman's district, et cetera. What people don't understand, I think, about the pro-Palestine issue is that it's a litmus test for folks. If you can be brave and stand up against this genocide, then we can trust you on a variety of different issues. And Zohran didn't win in spite of his pro-Palestine position. He won a majority of Jewish voters because of it. Yeah. And that is what Jeffries is incapable of responding to as somebody who takes money from AIPAC. And it's why Democratic leadership is bogging down this party right now. We need a change in leadership, because if you can't harness this energy right now, you are basically saying, we don't care if Donald Trump wins over and over again and this authoritarian takeover continues, because they're rejecting grassroots energy in favor of donors. And that's the core of the problem right now.
Yep, the donors are the ones who are the most important every time, regardless of what the Democratic Party voter base says. I mean, there was literally a centrist podcast I watched where Jeffries couldn't explain his lack of endorsement for Zohran Mamdani. Like, an actual centrist was saying, it's the Democratic candidate. Vote blue no matter who. At least that centrist from the Bulwark podcast, I believe it was, stayed true to his principles. And Fikaland is right. Jeffries should be worried, as it's not just Mamdani who's making progressive waves in challenges to establishment Democrats. DSA-backed Minnesota State Senator Omar Fateh shocked politicos to win the internal DFL, that's the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, the Minnesota version of the Democratic Party, their internal ballot for the endorsement in the Minneapolis mayoral election. Fateh, born in the USA to Somalian parents, ran on a platform of increased rent controls, social housing, increasing the minimum wage, and taxing wealthy residents. His main challenge will come from incumbent Mayor Jacob Frey, who is expected to receive the DFL endorsement, but that was not to be. An establishment stalwart, Frey has consistently stonewalled progressive legislation. He had vetoed multiple urbanization reform policies, has also both vetoed and opposed proposals that could enable future rent control policies, and on top of this, has vetoed plenty of workers' rights bills, such as a minimum wage for rideshare drivers and a labour standards board, and that was because he was being lobbied by business owners. He's also, like every other establishment Democrat, very pro-Israel, blocking a ceasefire motion and a motion to protect pro-Palestine campus protesters at the University of Minneapolis. This all stands to reason. Fateh has run a predominantly grassroots-funded campaign, yet Frey has raked in the megabucks from the landlord lobby. The DFL endorsement doesn't guarantee Fateh victory, though. It's a ranked choice election, so he'll need to build a wide base of support to oust Frey in November, as they are both still running. Now, moving on, let me introduce you to someone else. Graham Plattner from the northern state of Maine. An oyster farmer and veteran, he's entered the fray in the Democratic primary to face incumbent GOP Senator Susan Collins. And just like Zohran, he's put out a pretty snappy campaign ad, and it's produced by Mamdani ally Maurice Katz.
What I love most about Maine are the people. I have never met people who are more hard-scrabble, even in a place that requires you to work like 2 or 3 different jobs. We have watched this state become essentially unlivable for working-class people, and it makes me deeply angry. My name is Graham Plattner, and I'm running for U.S. Senate in Maine to defeat Susan Collins. A decade of military service going overseas, farming oysters to feed my community, diving to lend a hand to other fishermen, trying to start a family. But everywhere I've gone, it seems like the fabric of what holds us together is being ripped apart by billionaires and corrupt politicians, profiting off of destroying our environment, driving our families into poverty, and crushing the middle class. I did 4 infantry tours in the Marine Corps and the Army. I'm not afraid to name an enemy, and the enemy is the oligarchy. It's the billionaires who pay for it, and the politicians who sell us out. And yeah, that means politicians like Susan Collins. I'm not fooled by this fake charade of Collins' deliberations and moderation. The difference between Susan Collins and Ted Cruz is at least Ted Cruz is honest about selling us out and not giving a damn. People know that the system is screwing them. They know it in their bones. Nobody I know around here can afford a house. Healthcare is a disaster. Hospitals are closing. We have watched all of that get ripped away from us, and everyone's just trying to keep it all together. Why can't we have universal health care like every other first world country? Why can't we take care of our veterans when they come home? Why are we funding endless wars and bombing children? Why are CEOs more powerful than unions? We fought 3 different wars since the last time we raised the minimum wage. I'm not pretending to have all the answers, but I know that I'm asking the right questions. When I tell people around here that I'm running for Senate, sometimes the initial reaction is, what the but when I tell them why I'm doing it, because I truly do believe that we can build a system that is going to represent working people, the number one response has been, well, thank God somebody's going to do it. You're supposed to fight for the things you love. This is our home, and I will fight tirelessly for it, for you. It's Mainers first, in Maine, always.
Now, it's worth pointing out that there are a lot of kind of copycat Zohrans around from the Democratic Party's centrist campaign, and you can spot the centrists from the real progressives by the focus on policy in the videos, right? And it was very clear that Graham got the message in that people want to hear what they're going to do for the people of America. He's made it very clear. Universal healthcare and higher wages. His platform is outspokenly progressive, and he's clear that he has more people to fight than just Collins with his anti-oligarchs messaging. His support for Medicare for all, campaign finance reform, and an end to pointless wars. Like, he knows full well as a veteran that these wars are pointless. And he wants to pass the Protect Right to Organize, or PRO Act, to ensure the US labor workers' labor rights. Collins has defied the polls time after time, it seems, to keep Maine red, despite it being a Democratic-leaning state. And a wide field of candidates has emerged, hoping to be the one to unseat her in a pretty favourable Democratic environment despite their low polling numbers. Then, if we move on, there's Dr. Abdul El Sayed, running in the Michigan primary for Senate.
Michigan made my dreams possible. I grew up all-American here, became a doctor to help people, and spent my career making government deliver for us. I took on politicians and rebuilt Detroit's health department, got glasses for thousands of kids, helped young moms, and took on corporate polluters and led in our schools. Then I ran the state's largest health department, where we built big things, model programs for veteran services and to protect our kids.
Dr. El Sayed named Public Official of the Year. Cancels medical debt for thousands of Michiganders.
And yeah, I'm a bro with a podcast.
To dig into the epidemics America's facing.
Of economic and health insecurity, and the political system that holds us back. Here in Michigan, anything should be possible.
We need a little bit more of that Michigan grit and values in Washington.
We've got to fight back hard against Trump and Musk with a hell of a lot more than paper paddles and broken promises. They're not the disease, they're just the worst symptom. The disease is the corruption of our politics by billionaires and corporations.
El Sayed is aiming to replace retiring Senator Gary Peters of the Democratic Party. A former director of the Detroit Department for Health and a longtime Medicare for All campaigner, El Sayed has even written a book on the topic. His platform also includes policies on rent control and green industrial policy, as well as his outspoken opposition to the US military aid to Israel. Speaking of which, his establishment opponent in the primary is an absolute villain. Meet Haley Stevens. She's the current representative for Michigan's 11th Congressional District, and she is quite a piece of work. Whilst El Sayed has stated he will not take a penny of corporate PAC money, Stevens has already received $1.7 million so far. And so far, so establishment. But her policy positions are grotesque. She was one of the 75 House Democrats who voted to, quote, express gratitude to ICE for, quote, protecting the homeland, as Trump's Gestapo goon squad from ICE were tearing through Los Angeles, upturning the lives of immigrant communities as protesters took to the streets of America. And if that's not enough, she's also a staunch backer of Israel as it slaughters thousands in its genocidal rampage through Gaza. Not only does she support legal action against BDS, she has smeared the UNHCR for being supposedly biased against Israel and voted for legislation to sanction the ICC over its arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Galan. She even described Trump's Gaza ethnic cleansing plan as, quote, a curious proposal in an interview with Jewish Insider. Her only stated concern was the idea of UAP's troops on the ground, with not a word for the plight of the Palestinians in such a plan. It stands to reason she's one of the biggest recipients of Israeli lobby funding, over $5 million according to TrackAPAC.com. Dr. El Sayed will have his work cut out, as Stevens has friends in high places with the backing of Nancy Pelosi. With the Democratic Party in a mess, however, after a humiliating trifecta loss to Trump's Republican Party in November, we're beginning to see a similar kind of movement to what happened to the Republican Party in 2008. The Obama landslide motivated the far right to mount primary challenges to their failed establishment politicians via the Tea Party movement, which ultimately led to the rise of Trumpism. The Republican Tea Party, however, sought only to replace a political establishment with an economic establishment. The reconfiguration of the Democratic Party must be fought to create a party that serves the working class once again, just like it used to in the New Deal era. We're at a unique point in history. The wine mums are being radicalised, and a generation of politically active young people need a flag to rally around, and Zohran has created a blueprint for others to follow. Kieran, do you think there'll be a Democratic Party Tea Party?
Well, I think what's so interesting about all of this is that the liberal establishment, or let's say the centrist establishment, of course, which the Democrats typify, the Democrat high brass typifies in all of its kind of arrogance and imperious sense of the divine right to rule. I mean, you know, Pelosi, obviously, high profile example of it, but it's just all the way through that part of the Democrat Party. There is this kind of strong sense that everybody that isn't part of their wing of the party or drawn from the same kind of ideological roots as them is an imposter. And I think that so much of that kind of centrist establishment, liberal politics survives on the idea that there's nothing beyond that, right? But it's just impossible for anything beyond that to be realistic. Nice in concept, try it in the real world, it's going to fall flat on its face. And obviously that's designed. I mean, first of all, these guys are paid for. I mean, you've said that, Helena, you've given some examples. So let's not underestimate that element of it. But beyond that, I think they've drunk their own Kool-Aid in the sense that a lot of them genuinely believe there can be nothing beyond them. There can be nothing to the left of them. And that's just an empirical reality rather than an ethical, supposition. And so obviously when you get challenges to that, whether it's Mamdani or many of the others that you've named, then it deeply, deeply disturbs them and it offends their sense of the divine right to rule. And I think it's very liberating. Because it's like cracks in a dam. It's like being told this is the last wall in space-time. And then you're in that prison for a long time being told nothing else is possible. Somebody starts boxing it and breaks through it. And you discover, lo and behold, on the other side of that wall, that's the end of space-time, there's pick whatever you like, a big meadow, and there's a lot of work to do. I'm not saying that we're by any means, the left is back in America or it's going to take power imminently or anything like that. But New York City, the mayoralty in, I think, arguably, probably still the most important city in the West after Washington, D.C. or equal to Washington, D.C. That's no small feat. I mean, his powers will be, of course, there'll be all sorts of checks and balances and he'll come up against, billionaire media and so on. But that's no small feat. That's quite a remarkable breakthrough that actually seems to have come from more or less nowhere. I'm sure our American listeners or viewers will say that's just English ignorance, that, there's always been something building there for a while. But I think so much of this survives on the illusion that nothing beyond what the Democrat establishment or the Labour right over here, or, take your pick, what they anoint as possible and normative. And when that starts to be exposed as a fallacy, I think we could, anything is possible within reason, but anything is possible. And so it's very exciting.
I think what's important is the key issue here is canvassing. The key issue is having a ground game. That was the Mamdani method. People like to point to his slickly produced ads, and that was the main reason why he had so many supporters in the primary. And the reality is, these videos, these adverts, these are really good at getting people involved in the campaign. People already amenable to that messaging. It gets people excited to go out and knock on those doors. And it's when you knock on those doors that you change people's minds. There was a campaigner for the DSA who actually have a really big ground game they've been organising for a while. I know that people like to shit on the DSA a bit, but I think that they have done a lot of good work on the ground up until now, and they've had the member base ready to be out there engaging with people as soon as the time was right, which it was with this primary election for Mamdani. That's where the real primary was won, was on the doorsteps rather than on TikTok. And what we'd seen is their strategy was, from this organizer that I was kind of looking into what they were saying, they were specifically trying to speak to people who had never voted in primaries before, when the Democratic Party's line was you go and speak to people who've already been like triple primaries, so you get the highly engaged people. They were trying to build a new electoral universe for them to be able to draw upon in New York City. So they were talking to younger people. The number of young people under 30s hugely spiked if you look at the internal data compared to previous Democratic primaries in New York City. And some continental Asian voter base, people of Middle Eastern backgrounds, people like that. These voters were far more likely to turn out the last time than they were before. This was part of the new universe, the new electorate they were trying to draw on. Some people, indeed, who had voted Trump at the general election previously. And so this is now a huge base of support, not just in terms of canvassers, which they will be able to draw on to within New York City more broadly, but also a group of supporters that was always there. They were always there. They were always amenable to the DSA's message, to progressive policy, to what is, I guess, a social democratic kind of remit, but at least it's coming from a socialist perspective with regards to the people who's pushing the policy in terms of people like Mamdani. And that what that does mean is that next time there's a primary season in New York City, the centrists better watch out. There's a ground game that's ready to be able to be drawn upon. Whether you're a Richie Torres or a Hakeem Jeffries, there are going to be an army of people, given what Brad Lander did by co-endorsing with Mamdani, right? He has garnered himself so much goodwill as a progressive politician amongst the people who are canvassing for Zohran. If there's a primary for Hakeem Jeffries and Brad Lander wins, I think he wins easily. If AOC primary Schumer in the Senate seat, I think she wins easily. If you look at Richie Torres could get primary by Michael Blake, for example, I think he'd win easily, because fundamentally, at a time when the Democratic Party and its leadership really have very low approval, people who usually would vote are unmotivated. But you've built, you've canvassed, you've been on the ground talking to ordinary people who weren't previously engaged, and you've got them engaged with a message of socialist politics. It'll be much easier to draw on them at a future primary for a House seat or a Senate seat rather than for the actual election for the mayor of New York City. And they'll be far more motivated to come out than the kind of centrist, moderate, liberal types who would usually turn out to back the establishment candidates. So at a time of internal strife, I think this is where the key time to strike is now, whilst the iron is hot for people like the DSA and other progressive voices on the ground in America. Now, thank you very much for joining me tonight, Kieran. It was lovely to have you, as always.
Well, thank you for having me. I can't believe I called Marjorie Taylor Greene Marjorie Taylor Stone when we have such a handy mnemonic, i.e. MTG. I won't make the same mistake again.
I am very glad I got to cover my namesake for the first time on the channel. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.